Welcome to my series of video tutorials on how to prepare Form 990-EZ information return for small tax-exempt organizations. I'm David McCree. I'm a CPA, and you can find me on the web at myform990ez.com. Part 4 of the Form 990-EZ is probably one of the most problematic on the return. Understandably, people don't like listing their name and compensation on a public document. If you're an officer, director, trustee, or key employee, you must disclose your information in Part 4. What you're looking at here is Part 4 of page 2 of the Form 990-EZ, the list of officers, directors, trustees, and key employees, and their compensation. This is one that I have just made up, and this is what a typical Part 4 would look like for the average charitable organization. You can see in the left column, column A, the officers have to put their name and their title. So you can see I've indicated a name and then the president, another name, the vice president, and so on. The directors are simply just listed as directors. Officers have their title. Directors are just called directors. In the years past, the IRS asked for addresses to be listed on one of those lines, although it did not require that a personal residence be listed. The current Form 990 does not ask that an address be listed, and you should not list one. Now, as you can see, the information that's required to be disclosed in Part 4 includes the name, the title, the average hours worked per week, and the amounts of compensation paid. Schedule O can be used if there are any compensation arrangements that you'd like to explain in more detail. I highly encourage the use of Schedule O to explain the compensation arrangements if they're not straightforward. I find that it's often the case in a small organization that the executive director, who might also be one of the founders of the organization, chooses not to be listed in Part 4 mainly because they don't want to show their compensation. This is not acceptable to the IRS. Failure to disclose the required information can result in the return being deemed incomplete and therefore not filed. And of course, then it would be subject to the late filing penalties, which add up quickly. So let's talk for a minute about officers, directors, and key employees. Okay. Officers are elected or appointed to manage the operation of the organization. They would generally consist of the president, the vice president, the secretary, and the treasurer. And they would also be defined in the and listed in the Articles of Incorporation. They have voting power on the board of directors. Directors or trustees are members of the board of directors, and they must have voting power in order to be shown as a director or as a trustee. Key employees are employees who have managerial authority over the organization, but who may not have voting power on the board of directors. The executive director and the chief financial officer would be considered key employees for purposes of the 990-EZ Part 4. Now, if your organization has hired an independent contractor to serve as an executive director, maybe an interim executive director, or as a CFO or other management official, and let's say their compensation is not reported on a W-2, it's reported on a 1099 miscellaneous, they should still be shown as a key employee, even though technically they're not an employee. The person who signs the Form 990-EZ is considered an officer and must be listed as such in Part 4, even if that person isn't considered an officer in the Articles of Incorporation. Okay, so whoever's signing that Form 990-EZ, they should show up here in Part 4, even if they're not compensated, right? Now, that's something, it actually even says that right up at the top of Part 4. List each one, even if not compensated. So looking at column A, you're going to enter the name and title. Column B, you're going to enter the number of hours devoted to their position, the number of hours per week. So it's going to be an average. And if you've got a situation where your activities are very seasonal, and a person does 12 hours a week for part of the year, and then only 1 hour a week for the other part of the year, you can come up with some sort of a reasonable average. Okay, and now you have to actually enter the number of hours. You can't say as needed. Right? You used to be able to do that, but you can't do that anymore. And you can't say 20 plus hours. Right? You either have to list a number of hours or a decimal amount. So like 0.5 would be for half an hour per week. Column C, reportable compensation, includes amounts that are reported on both the W-2 and on the 1099 miscellaneous. Now in this section, part 4, don't leave any spaces that blank. Okay, if no compensation is paid, be sure you enter zeros. Otherwise, it can easily be interpreted that you just simply chose not to disclose the compensation. Putting a 0 in there indicates that there's no compensation. The other thing that's important is that compensation is reported on the calendar year that ends within the organization's fiscal year. So if an organization has a June 30, 2015 year end, compensation would be shown for the calendar year ending December 2014. So that means that Part 4 compensation amounts won't necessarily match compensation that's reported elsewhere on the return. And that's, again, because Part 4 is based on the calendar year, not the fiscal year of the organization. Okay, now if the organization operates on a calendar year, then it would match. Don't report duplicate amounts in columns C through E. In other words, if you've already reported an amount in one column, do not report it in another column. Most small organizations will only be reporting amounts in column C, so detailed explanations of columns D and E are beyond the scope of this video. You should refer to the form instructions, which actually are pretty good. If you use Schedule O to provide additional detail, be sure to check this box in the upper right corner of Part 4 to indicate that there's a Schedule O attached with further explanation. I hope that's helpful to you, and I hope this will encourage you not to overlook this part of the return. It is a very serious part of the return. Spend some time on it. Be sure you're transparent. Disclose compensation. Disclose number of hours. If the number of hours is 0, put 0. Not that big a deal. Now, if you had an entire board that put 0 hours into it, that could be a problem. Okay, but if you have a couple of directors, say 2 out of 7 or 8 who had 0 hours, I don't see that as being a particular problem. I hope this has been helpful to you. Good luck with the form. Thanks for watching my video tutorial. If you need more help, you can find me on the web at myform990ez.com.